Many thanks for that. And now, as ever, to the front pages and images from those protests in London, in particular, appear on a few papers. There's the Mail on Sunday and the police horse bolting there. And there is a protester there in the middle of the Sunday Times. They've gone on a big political story, however, which is that great dilemma about the unlocking. It says there that Boris Johnson was warned this week by Alok Sharma that 3.5 million jobs might go if we don't unlock quickly. And he's reacting to that. There's the Observer taking a very, very different line. It's saying the Prime Minister has been told dump the rhetoric and plan for a new second wave of COVID. We'll be talking about that as well later on. Sunday Telegraph there, it says the Prime Minister is speeding up the hospital building programme as a route out of a potential recession. Lots and lots and lots about Madeleine McCann, of course, in all the papers, but we don't learn an awful lot about that, I have to say, in terms of new facts. There's the Sunday Express. Boris wants to fix unfair Brexit deal. They've turned back to Brexit. And finally, there's the Sunday Mirror, again talking about Maddie. Clive, let us start. First of all, thank you very much. I saw you last night doing the 10 o'clock news. You have got up early and very kindly come in.
Not a problem.
So what do you make of the coverage of yesterday's protest, generally across the papers?
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Front page of the Daily Mail that you pointed to there, WPC hurt horse bolts amid mayhem. Dramatic picture of the horse bolting there. And the poor WPC on the floor, having been thrown from her mount. We understand that she's stable and the horse is okay. And the inside page of the Sunday Telegraph there, UK protesters join the global outcry at George Floyd's death. It's interesting that the majority of the papers haven't gone full pelt on the violence yesterday. This was very much at the end. Exactly. It was very much at the end of the protests, which were largely peaceful right across the country and indeed in the United States. They haven't gone full pelt on that. And it's interesting that that should happen because that's been the constant problem for those trying to raise issues about and raise awareness about racism in America, that at some point during that debate, it gets hijacked. And it gets hijacked by something else, violence, looting, and so on.
So we end up talking about that and not about George Floyd or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anushka Astana of The Guardian. One of the other criticisms people make about these protests, they're saying it's the sort of internationalisation of an American experience. It doesn't really happen here in Britain. But there's a story in the Mirror that you think points to the opposite conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, clearly people who are taking to the streets of London or Manchester are doing it in solidarity with George Floyd and also those terrible, terrible figures in the US. But they're also saying that there is a problem here in the UK. And there's an interview in the Sunday Mirror, a heartbreaking interview with Aji Lewis, whose son, Olaseni, was restrained by 11 police officers in 2010 and then died afterwards. She says she can't watch the video of George Floyd because her son's final words were also, "I can't breathe." Now, she actually found out more details about what happened from a journalist, and it took 7 years to get an inquest that said excessive force was used. There have been 180 deaths of BAME people who died after contact with the police since 1990 in this country, and force is used twice as often as for when people are not from the BAME community. So clearly people, when they're taking to the streets, feel that there is something that they want to say on an international level as well, and here in the UK. And Andrew, I just want to mention something that has really, really stuck with me this week. I mean, I do not know in this case what type of restraint was used, but we all know that it was a chokehold used in the case of George Floyd. And a lot of us found that video very, very shocking. But this week I spoke to a former prosecutor and to an academic in the US, a guy called Paul Butler, for our daily podcast, a black man himself who's got many stories. And the thing that really struck me was he wrote a book about the policing of black men in America 3 years ago, and he called it Chokehold, because this is not a new act. This is something that has been used over decades, in fact, over hundreds of years. And actually what's chilling about that video is not that it's unusual, it's actually that it's quite normal.
Anushka, to what extent do you think what we now call social media, I never know if that's the right phrase, frankly, but you see the video of George Floyd circulating very, very fast among millions of people. Is that what's really made the difference here? Because, as you say, these things have been going on for quite a long time in the shadows, unseen by most people.
I think two things make the difference. Partly it is that ability to get these videos out and for people to see the injustice with their own eyes. And partly it's because the George Floyd video is so much more striking than what we have seen before. As one person put it to me this week, you're basically watching a man narrating his own death. I mean, it's the most shocking thing that most people have ever seen, but it is the fact that, as you say, it's happened before, time and again, that made people really want to take action. You know, only weeks ago, there was another unjust case, not involving police violence, but involving an unjust response to the killing of a black man, Ahmaud Arbery. And that didn't have the same level of reaction because there wasn't quite such a striking video.
Very interesting. Clive, a lot of people, of course, will look at these images from yesterday and be very upset and offended by the verbal violence and the actual violence against British police, who were standing there and taking it quite quietly and silently. They weren't putting on their helmets, they weren't raising their shields. It was quite a moderate police response.
Very different, actually, to the response of the American police in a similar situation in cities right across the United States following 12 days of protests over there.
Why do you think, because you've reported on this, are the American police quite so violent?
First of all, it's a minority.
Yeah.
We need to be clear about that, but there is very little oversight, which means that those individual bad apples can move from one police force to another. There are 18,000 across the United States, so there's plenty of opportunity to get work. There is very little oversight, and the police unions are very, very strong and very, very powerful. But the American police see themselves as enforcers of the law. They are that thin blue line between anarchy and chaos and a civil, normal society. Exactly. Whereas here, it's policing by consent. It's community-led, by and large. Obviously, there are incidents, particularly with stop and search laws and so on, that aggravate and exacerbate particular differences between black suspects and white suspects. But there is that crucial difference in America that they are the last line of defense against anarchy. And as a result, there is a huge militarization of the American police in a way that we simply don't have here. You get the Pentagon selling surplus weaponry off to American police forces. They're tooled up completely. And, you know, this is evidenced in the fact that you have 57 police officers resign in solidarity with 2 police officers who were pushed over a 75-year-old man in the middle of the street, caught on camera. Those 57 police officers, you're wondering, why are they resigning in solidarity with that? It's very much us against them, and that's the attitude.
Clive, let's turn to your other hat, as it were. You've been reporting from NHS hospitals on the COVID-19 very movingly this week.
I mean, it's an interesting, it's the front page of The Observer, actually.
Let me just put it to you. I mean, given what you've seen in hospitals, as I said at the top of the programme, there's a bit of a divide in this country between those of us who are really, really worried about COVID-19 and still behaving in a different way, and people who simply think, actually, it's all over. The unlocking can now start. We're going back to ordinary life. What would be your advice, given what you've seen over the last couple of weeks?
Given my day job, me offering advice is a tricky thing, particularly in this studio. I mean, all I can say is that the possibility of a second wave is what is at the forefront of the minds of healthcare professionals in the National Health Service. And I saw that myself filming at the Royal London Hospital. And it's simple mathematics from their point of view. If you ease the lockdown, more people are out and about, more people are going to be in contact with each other. Some not necessarily wearing face masks, some not necessarily observing, social distancing rules, and so on and so forth. As a result, you are going to get a rise in infections. And I think the fear, certainly from the Observer article, and certainly from Professor Martin Marshall of the Royal College of GPs, who's quoted in that article, is that we're not seeing a precipitous enough fall in infections to warrant the kind of easing that we're seeing from the government. That's the argument from healthcare professionals. Now, there are other epidemiologists who are arguing that, no, we're not going to get necessarily a second wave. But if we do get a second wave, and it's towards the winter months, then that's what the NHS fears will be the worst possible of all outcomes.
And that means, Anushka, that this is, in a sense, a political decision about the speed of the unlocking. And we saw the front page of the Sunday Times there. If Boris Johnson is being warned now that another 3.5 million jobs could just go like that if we don't move quickly, you can see why he would want to speed things up, as he appears to be doing this week.
Yeah, Tim Shipman, the Sunday Times political editor, is describing the moment that Alok Sharma, the business secretary, presented those figures to Boris Johnson as the most significant moment for the government since they actually decided to go into the full lockdown. Apparently, Boris Johnson looked at them and went, Christ. And that's why he's pushing people to ease the lockdown more quickly. The worry is not just what Clive is saying to you there, but also, you know, we've had scientists this week, including from SAGE, warning that it is too soon. We saw those Public Health England figures with the University of Cambridge over the weekend for the R number in different regions, and it did suggest that in some parts of the country it's still above 1. Now, if that is true, then the level of COVID in those areas will be rising exponentially. And also, a colleague of mine, Sarah Marsh, had an exclusive that suggested the track, test and trace system might not be fully up and running or world class, as it was described, until September. So real concerns, but as you say, real concerns about the economy as well. And I just want to mention this other story in The Sun with a headline that I'm not sure if it's going to catch on, resurgence, they've called it, which is about Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, trying to do things to boost the economy. One of the things they're talking about is relaxing Sunday trading laws. And I just wanted to mention that because I saw an interesting tweet from Polly Mackenzie, who was a senior advisor in the coalition years, saying they actually looked to do this at the time. And the consensus in the business community was extending hours won't necessarily increase trade.
Well, Anushka, you brilliantly push us forward to two things we will be talking about later in the programme. The Sunday trading laws issue you've just been mentioning, and, of course, the speed or otherwise of the unlocking. Thank you very much indeed, Anushka Astana and Clive Myrie, two great broadcasters. But so to the weather. Some people claim that it's been cold and wet. No, absolutely not. It's been refreshing, bracing, though I got absolutely soaked yesterday. Over to Sarah Keith Lucas in